To the portion of this bill that you've now been discussing, where we evaluate the teachers.
You want to talk about that?
Yes.
Can I let Kathy Nolan,
yes,
the chairwoman?
That'd be great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Kathy.
Ms. Nolan, you've been asked to yield.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Nolan. Now, the governor early on in the budget process presented us with his own process for a new evaluation program for our educators. It was tied to the standardized inappropriate developmental test called Common Core. What happened to that proposal that the governor sent to us? What did the majority do with that?
There have been three proposals, three changes on annual professional performance review in 4 years. The latest proposal from the executive was 50% on state test scores and 50% the observations or the local piece. I think the end product, which our majority and our colleagues in the Senate have embraced, is that the regents of the state of New York will decide within certain parameters. Teachers can be, no teacher can be ineffective on both measures, you know. We have a little chart we've been showing in conference, but they can be, you can be rated developing. In other words, on certain measures, if you're ineffective in one measure, it gets a little confusing. But we think by not going to 50% state test scores, the regent's expertise will produce a much less flawed system, and perhaps this will be the charm, you know, third time or fourth time the charm. And we will have a system that allows us to, yes, fairly look at teachers using data and evaluation and the new ways we do things in this world with the computer and what have you, but still retain an important local component, my colleagues, where the regents will be involved with our 670-plus school districts to come up with something fairer and reasonable. We think it's more moderate and more reasonable than what the executive proposed, and the executive has agreed with the legislature, and so now we have it in a three-way bill.
So basically what we've done is we've substituted what's in this bill now for what the governor has presented to us, and given up pretty much unilaterally any involvement of ourselves in any of the decision-making as it relates after this proposal gets to the Commissioner of Education. Well, I'm not done with my question.
Sorry.
So you talked about an end. Basically, isn't this just an end round of what the governor wanted to do? We've given up any of our responsibility on behalf of educators and kids as it relates to the Common Core standardized test, utilization of them, and we've said the commissioner, education commissioner, a non-elected bureaucrat, is going to decide unilaterally without any input for us other than what's in this bill. And what that means to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, if the Commissioner of Education says in the first part of this bill, utilization of standardized tests, he still wants to use that particular part as 50% of the evaluation of our teachers. He can unilaterally do that because we're no longer involved with ratifying that, and the governor basically has done an end around. Is that correct?
Okay. The question has a lot of parts.
Well, just one part. Can he make it 50% of the evaluation?
No.
Why not?
I thought I explained it, and I don't think that we have abrogated our responsibilities. First of all, we have to be realistic, colleagues. Teachers have been evaluated for decades by their principals, by their superintendents, and certainly not by the legislature. That's the last thing I want to do is go into a classroom and evaluate a teacher. I can't imagine you would want to do that either. So our role is to try to give guidance. We took the governor's proposal, and as Mr. Farrell articulated in the answers to Mr. Ra's questions, we changed that proposal in concert with the Senate and got the executive to agree. 35% will be done by an evaluator at the local level. That could be an outside district administrator, right? I'm sorry, that was the governor's plan. What we're going to have here is a continuation of the principal and independent evaluators. We think there'll be less emphasis on outside observation, and no, there will not be a 50% test score model.
What percentage can he use as a standardized test?
Well, you know.
What's stopping at 50%?
Right now, I think it's 40. Is it 40? So, you know, it's 20 local, 40. You know, it's changed each time. Well, obviously, one of the things we are going to ask the regents to do is evaluate the local component of the existing plans and evaluate the proportion on a little chart that we're calling highly effective, developing, ineffective, and come back by November with approved plans at the local level that will have, I hope and expect, a fair component of testing and local evaluation. Which
Mrs. Nolan, I don't see that little chart here. I don't see anything in this bill that says that the commissioner cannot utilize that standardized test, which, by the way, didn't you say the other day you would have your child opt out on this point, on those Common Core?
I have said, Mr. Speaker, my colleagues, that in many ways, as someone who thought there was some merit to trying to do some testing, I took tests in school. Most of us take tests through life. I do think that we went, perhaps unintentionally and with the best of intentions, things went too far. And I do feel, even in my own son's education, that was a little too much, a little too relentless. And that happens in education. You know, they kind of go over the barrel. You know, they get into something and it just keeps going and going. This legislation is very clear. And again, to repeat what Mr. Farrell said very clearly, there are no set percentages in the bill. No set percentages. No 50% as the executive had proposed.
That's why I said the commissioner could pick 50% if he or she chose to.
Well, that'd be one way to probably be a pretty soon ex-commissioner. But I
well,
think
whether it be ex-commissioner or not, you're not denying the fact that he can follow through with the governor's plan to make it a 50% part of the evaluation.
Well, that's not really, we would not agree with that. The commissioners had a variety of powers now. You know, prior to this, you could argue that the districts had 100% authority. What this does is enter into it the new piece of it, the idea that there's an evaluation. Local components still have to be part of this evaluation under the executive's original proposal, which we in the majority pushed back on very aggressively. The local test component cannot be completely eliminated. And that's what the executive wanted to do. So all budgets are compromises. We feel comfortable. We have confidence in our regents. We feel, especially with the addition of some new people on the Board of Regents, but even the people who've served with distinction for years prior. They're independent. Their terms are for 5 years. They are not accountable in that way to us in a kind of a way that wouldn't be appropriate. They have a 5-year term. They're given the title of regent so that they put their best effort into this in an effective way, dare I say an apolitical way, a nonpartisan way, a true educational way.
Ms. Nolan, should the parents be able to refuse their children to take this Common Core test?
We've had some conversations about this, Mr. Speaker. That's not before us today, but I think the colleague is aware that I have expressed some interest with him in discussions about developing some legislation that would reinforce, if it needs to be reinforced, a parent's ability to opt out. They don't necessarily need legislation. 60,000 families opted out already. There is no sanction if you choose not to have your child take these statewide tests, and I don't believe that there ever should be. So parents have the right to opt out now. Whether we need to strengthen that is something I've expressed to the gentleman a great willingness to do, but it's not before us in this bill. What's before us is the legislature coming up with a reasonable effort, and I realize there's a certain chagrin, you know, because we have tried in the past and it has not been successful, but I believe that we have come up with something this time that we all believe will be a strengthening of local component, local evaluation, which is what we had prior anyway, with guidance from the regents as to the proper percentages, and the opportunity for teachers to be rated developing, effective, highly effective, etc. And yes, some effort to perhaps counsel out people that shouldn't be in the classroom. Probably people, Mr. Speaker, like my colleague and I. Nobody would want us in the classroom.
Thank you, Mrs. Nolan. Okay. On the bill,
Thank you.
Mr. Tedesco on the bill.
Yeah, this is your classic end around. This is a majority that doesn't want to take responsibility for not protecting our kids, our educational system, or our educators. What's going to happen here is the governor is going to get his way. He's going to have a commissioner which listens to exactly what he has to say, whoever he or she is, because the governor will be putting that commissioner in place. And the fact of the matter is that commissioner is going to utilize every single thing that you're going to go back to your constituents and educators and say, well, we rejected that. You didn't reject it. You gave it to a single unilateral person who's going to put in place an overutilization of standardized tests which are hurting our kids because they're not developmentally appropriate. Raise your hand if you're an educator in this room, because I had a real job at one time. For 10 years, I taught kids. I was an educator. I taught kids with learning disabilities. I got a degree in special education. I'm very proud of that. Difficult job, tough job, but the most rewarding job in the world. And you know what? I never was concerned about standardized tests. I wanted them to do well on standardized tests, but I knew that there was a whole group of measures that they were going to be evaluated on. Not a teacher who was going to be evaluated on by 50% of a test that has 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th grade comprehensive questions for 3rd and 4th graders. That's what you're getting right now. And what you need to do is not only protect our children and our educators, you got to protect our educational system. Because this is a top-down, one-size-fits-all structure that came from faceless bureaucrats at the federal level. Follow the money, follow multinational, multi-billion-dollar testing companies who want as many tests for as many states, evaluated at the highest level possible for kids, for educators, and for schools. That's the way they make the money. And if you really want to protect our kids, support the Common Core Parental Refusal Act. Don't pass what your responsibility is to protect your kids and your schools and your educators onto a commissioner who you don't even know is in place right now, because that commissioner is going to unilaterally put in place what you're suggesting you didn't agree with the governor. Totally irresponsible and shameful. And if you want to go back and tell your constituents you're doing this, or educators across the state, I don't think they're going to listen to you. I think they're going to turn their backs on you because they know the game that you're playing. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.